My friends, we have finally arrived towards the final part of, you know,
The Battle
of the First Crusade series, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how this ends. This has been quite the series. I've enjoyed this. Learning, my favorite parts have been the early stages of just learning about the complete mess that took place with the People's Crusade and whatnot, the constant issues, and yet how everything has worked out seemingly well for the Crusaders, and even just the politics of the Crusader states. It's all been interesting, so I'm gonna be a little bit sad to say goodbye to this series, as I am with most series, to be honest, but yeah, nothing good lasts forever. So let's get to it. Let's see the thrilling conclusion of the First Crusade series by Kings and Generals.
In the course of this story, we examined the unravelling of the Byzantine Empire after the death of Basil II, culminating in the Battle of Manzikert and the Norman invasions. In the chaos that followed, what seemed to be just another usurper climbed the steps and sat on the throne in Constantinople. Alexios Komnenos had no treasury, no army, little legitimacy, and few allies, so he conjured up a story and meticulously aimed it at the Latin world, sprinkling religious artifacts as trinkets that spurred the imagination of peasants, nobles, and clergy alike. The emperor was successful and carefully guided the largest army assembled in Europe in the past 700 years, directing it towards the heartland of treacherous Anatolia, despite many provocations and raids. Now in the year 1111, less than 10% of that splintered army remained, but their stubborn existence in the face of Seljuk, Fatimid, and Byzantine attacks would change the course of history forever. Alexios was becoming wiser with age, but that also came with illnesses such as gout and asthma, letting him know that the clock was ticking. That same clock had already run out for both Bohemond, who died isolated in Apulia, and Bertrand of Tripoli, who was succeeded by his 14-year-old son, Pons. Tancred, who was acting regent of Antioch, pounced at the opportunity and reconciled with the Occitan contingent in the Holy Lands by granting to Tosa, Maraclea, Safita, and Crac de Chevalier, all claimed by the Counts of Tripoli, to Pons as fiefs. The young lord, technically a vassal of both Byzantium and Jerusalem, was now indebted to the Normans. That following year, the man instrumental in both capturing and holding Antioch, Tancred, succumbed to typhus. In his will, he ordered his wife, Cecile, daughter of the French king, to be engaged to Pons, further cementing the alliance between the two factions. The princedom of Galie passed to Joscelin of Courtenay, while Antioch was inherited by Bohemond's 4-year-old son, Bohemond II, who was back in Italy with his mother, Constance. Naturally, this meant that a new regent was needed, and Tancred personally chose Roger of Salerno. These moments of instability were exactly what the regional rivals were waiting for. So, in 1112, the Atabeg of Mosul, Modud ibn al-Tuntash, launched a campaign that started with the siege of Turbessel, the core of Josselin's domain. In June, a small crusader force he led pushed the Seljuks back. Shortly afterwards, an attempt by an Armenian peasant army to capture Edessa was discovered, and Baldwin of Bourges, ruler of Edessa, galloped towards the city walls and slaughtered them. Down south, Baldwin of Jerusalem's advances were halted at Tyre, which he failed to capture, partly due to the departure of his Norwegian allies. In April 1112, a large combined force from the newly allied Fatimids and the Atabeg of Damascus, Togteki, forced him to lift the siege and ride back to his capital. Mordud proposed to unite all Islamic forces against the Christians and repulse them once and for all, resulting in the most promising anti-Crusader coalition since 1098. In 1113, the armies of Mosul and Damascus stood as one and crossed the river Jordan south of the Sea of Galilee. In response, Baldwin and his bannermen offered battle near the bridge of Al-Sanabra. The numbers on both sides are unknown, but a decisive blow here could have meant a disaster for either side. Modud used the classic feigned retreat, and drew many of the Crusaders out of their defensive positions, including Baldwin, who charged in. Almost immediately, he realized his mistake as he encountered the full force of the coalition army, and his soldiers were attacked from every side. Yet again, a string of luck and good armor saved the king, but the same could not be said for a big portion of his army. The survivors formed up and held their ground against the arrow fire while the Muslim coalition began sending columns to raid the countryside. One of them sacked the town of Nablus, all while the Crusaders could only hold their ground on a nearby hill. Contingents from Tripoli and Antioch soon reinforced Baldwin, but he still lacked the means to repulse the raiders. Despite that, Mordud and Toghtekin failed to take any major stronghold, and soon turned back once supplies ran out. The victorious
Again, just like, something so cool about the Crusader states is just, despite how much power they lack, resources, manpower, they are not going away. Like, they are holding off against everyone. In this weird, like, precarious situation they've established themselves, like, I guess in Syria, you know? It is just impressive. I have to give it to that, you know what I mean?
leaders feasted in Damascus, where before long, the Hashashins struck their next blow. Mordud was slain after his prayers by the Secret Order, which would later end up killing the next two rulers of Mosul in 1126 and 1131.
Wow, I didn't expect like Assassin's Creed to get involved, but holy crap.
Later that year, Emir of Aleppo...
with all the Assassin's Creed games that have taken place in random historical areas, like at this point, is there an Assassin's Creed game set around the First Crusade? If there isn't, then they should get to work on that, because they can already make a storyline right here, look. like with this. Like, I know they have one around, like, the time of, like, Rome, of Julius Caesar. I think they have a French one, too, like, of the French Revolution. I think even Napoleon's in that game, but, like, at this point, why not? Make a Assassin's Creed game based on the First Crusade. We rather as well just throw Assassin's Creed in every historical moment in history.
So Ridwan died of old age, and the streets of Aleppo were flooded with violent militia, who captured every supporter of the Order of Assassins and executed them for conspiring with the Crusaders. The successor, Alp-Arslan, was 16 then, but suffered from a severe speech impediment, which gave him the nickname Al-Akras, or the Mute. Upon his ascension, many of his brothers were killed, and only a year later, a usurper called El-Baba killed the boy in hopes of obtaining power for himself with the support of Damascus. Taking advantage of the fact that his enemies were distracted and killing each other, ruler of Edessa, Baldwin of Bourg, hatched a plot of his own by inviting Jocelyn of Courtenay under the pretense that he was writing his will. Upon arrival, Jocelyn was imprisoned and forced to relinquish all his fiefs except Galilee. Soon after, the two sides mended their relations with the classic marriage alliance pact as they married each other's sisters. The latter phase of the First Crusade...
Dude really just stole so much of his stuff and then said, okay, let's get married to each other's sisters. That's insane. The politics, man, is insane.
Is a constant rotation between years where all sides are taking a pause and preparing for the upcoming conflicts, and ones filled with impactful events. 1113 is easily one of the busiest of those years.
Okay, 1113 is also the year when the Order of Knights of the Hospital of St. John was founded to protect pilgrims to the Holy Land, formally recognized by the Papal Bull, a former proclamation issued by Pope Pascal II called Pi Postulatio Voluntatis.
Back in Byzantium, Alexios was struggling with the fact that almost all the Crusader leaders he had personally met and received oaths from were now dead.
Yeah, now you got, I mean, they were already kind of iffy about their oaths already, but now he has a new generation of people who have no loyalty to him, who don't even know him that, like, personally at all, which makes them even more dangerous in a sense, because there's no pretext or charade of we're allies, or like, you know, again, Alexios, unfortunately, you know, now just has to put up with it, and it's a shame because he has so many grand ambitions. But again, he's only human, and his time's coming up too. So, but then again, he should be proud in a sense that all that he accomplished. Like he took Rome when it was like basically had lost almost all of Anatolia and stuff, and he's really like been impressive. Alexios, I'd say, is one of the best of the Roman emperors of the Byzantine era, and it's a shame he came up in a time of so much conflict. Because if he, I said before, imagine he'd been the one to follow Basil, like could have had like a new golden age for the Byzantines. Unfortunately, he had to follow up several awful emperors and try to fix their mistakes. But again, his greatness is still not to be understated, I think. I'm a huge fan of him. I can't wait to read the Alexiad because I do want to read a little bit more, and learn more about this guy, even if it is through a more, I don't know, different lens.
New generation of leaders didn't experience his hospitality firsthand, and was quick to forget the many shipments that prevented their annihilation, as well as the guides that got them through Anatolia. They knew him as the treacherous emperor who abandoned them at Antioch and attacked the hero Bohemond. Alexios exhausted every diplomatic measure, yet he was nowhere closer to securing the Holy Land, especially Antioch. Unfortunately for him, his dream had to be postponed, as the death of Kilij Arslan led to a new wave of Seljuk incursions. His son, Malik Shah, didn't ratify the truce between the two sides, and in both 1110 and 1112, major raids were conducted around Smyrna. In 1113, a massive army marched up to the gates of Nicaea and began pillaging and looting the countryside. The city's governor sallied out with his forces and confronted the Seljuks, only to be captured in the fighting. It was then that Alexios did the unthinkable and crossed over, personally leading his army as he tried to catch up to the enemy.
Oh, dang. I hope he doesn't die like this. I think if anyone deserves a natural death, it's Alexios. I hope he doesn't die. But holy crap, old man Grandpa Alexios is coming out to fight. And again, like, he is a proven great commander in his own right, but it's just, how old is he? Like, you know what I mean? Like, is he okay? He had, like, illnesses like gout and stuff, like... I don't know, I'm kind of a bit worried now about Alexios, because I'm, like, kind of rooting for him.
The emperor rescued vast amounts of loot and prisoners after a quick skirmish, and the governor of Nicaea was saved. Unfortunately, all hope of securing the Holy Land was abandoned, as a new war with the Sultanate of Rum was at hand. In 1114, all sides were licking their wounds, and there was little to no activity, especially since a massive earthquake destroyed most of Antioch's formidable defences, forcing its regent to devote most of his time to restoring them. The other notable event was the continued assault on Edessa by the new Atabeg of Mosul, Azuki, who invaded in May before being repelled. The following year, however, would be filled with action on nearly every front. In 1115, the Seljuk Sultan Muhammad Tapa, who had been calling for action against the Crusaders, appointed Bursuk II, the Lord of Hamadan, as the leader of a large force made up of soldiers from Upper Mesopotamia, numbering between 8,000 to 10,000. News of this force shocked not only the Crusader princes, but other regional powers too. The new Atabeg of Aleppo, al-Baba, sent envoys to both Toghtekin of Damascus and El-Ghazi of Mardin and asked them for aid against the Sultan, while they, in their own right, approached Roger of Salerno. Messengers galloped all over the Holy Land, and pretty soon everyone in the Levant was in a temporary alliance against the Seljuk Sultan. This included Edessa, Antioch...
Man, the continual, like, alliance shifts is kind of amazing. Despite all the people of this area being, like, a complete mess, of turning on each other, fighting each other, it's cool to see that every time an outside threat comes, they all unify to, like, prevent, like, an outside enemy, like, because they know that they need to keep surviving, So it is just a cool ever shifting like political landscape. It's as unstable as the Crusades are, which I kind of like, you know.
Tripoli and Jerusalem. In short, the only way to unite all of these squabbling states was for an outside force like the Byzantines or Seljuks to invade them. The Allies gathered their armies and moved 80 kilometers south to the walled town of Apamea, strategically located at the crossroads between Aleppo, Damascus and Antioch, allowing them to maneuver and rescue whichever city Bursuk headed to. The next time scouts reported movement of the Seljuk army was when it captured Hama, a town 30 kilometers from their location, before camping at Shaizar. Baldwin of Jerusalem immediately mobilized 500 knights and 1,000 foot soldiers and marched north. Along the way, the now adult Count Pawn of Tripoli joined the fray with 200 knights and 2,000 infantry. The king sent a message forbidding Roger from engaging the enemy before reinforcements arrived. Bursuk's forces soon closed around Roger's armed camp, attempting to lure the Antiochenes and their allies into a charge. Their skirmishing tactics severely provoked the Latins. Things were so tense that Roger threatened to put out the eyes of any man who sallied out of the camp without permission. Later, he rode through the camp with his sword drawn to emphasize his point. When Bursuk heard of Baldwin's relieving force, which included 5,000 Muslim allies, he withdrew to the east. Baldwin's combined army may have been as large as 10,700 men. The coalition quickly followed and burned much of Shaizar as punishment for allying with the Seljuks. When Bursuk didn't turn back to defend the town, the allied leaders assumed the campaign was over and left for home. As soon as the allied host dispersed, Bursuk invaded again and captured the Christian-held town of Kafatab near Apamea. A weary and abandoned.
Okay, I like that. He just waited. Is Baldwin like the last of the major OG players still around? I'm kind of impressed by him, and he's just been sticking around. But again, this dispersal, they celebrated a bit too soon. So Bursuk is just gonna keep going.
Roger recalled his Antiochene army and took to the field again with just 700 cavalry and 2,000 infantry, supported only by Baldwin of Bork's contingent from Edessa. Meanwhile, Bursuk took his army towards Zerdana, not far from Antioch. Roger stationed his army south of the city at the castle of Rugia, near a bridge on the Orontes River. Early on September 14th, Roger received intelligence that his opponents were carelessly going into camp near Samin to water their horses. He rapidly advanced and took Bursuk's army by complete surprise. As the Crusaders launched their attack, some Turkic soldiers were still entering the camp. Roger divided the Frankish army into left, centre and right divisions. Baldwin led the left wing, while Prince Roger personally commanded the centre. The Crusaders attacked in an echelon formation, with the left wing leading. As we often see in these charge or feign retreat battles, once one side surprised the other, victory was imminent. The Seljuks were pressed back to a hillside behind their camp, which quickly became overrun by the Crusaders. The Frankish right was the only place where the Latins struggled, as a Seljuk counterattack broke the Turcopoles stationed there. The fighting continued for some time, but ultimately Roger was victorious and proved himself a worthy successor to Tancred.
You notice how, I noticed the two tricks. The Turks always use the feign retreat. The Crusaders always use as surprise attacks. Those seem to be the two main tactics that have been the most effective on each side. The Turks usually winning with feigned retreats, and the Crusaders usually winning with just attacking them when they're either asleep in night attacks or just unawares. Which makes sense for the Crusader considering their manpower issues, and the Turks obviously from the steppes utilizing just the feigned retreat with their cavalry and stuff. It makes sense, but I just noticed every battle just kind of delves to who can do the feigned retreat or who can surprise each other first, you know?
At least 3,000 Seljuks were killed and many captured, along with property worth 300,000 bezants. In contrast, the Frankish losses were minor. This victory solidified the Crusader domains in the north, and neutralized the danger of Mosul for a whole decade.
Wow.
With the Seljuk threat eliminated, the Muslim Atabegs quickly broke their alliance with the Crusaders, and some personally travelled to Baghdad to obtain a pardon from Muhammad Tapa. Baldwin of Bourges made good use of this victory by moving against some small Armenian principalities in the valley of the Euphrates, taking Berejik and a few other towns whose population he resettled elsewhere. As for Baldwin of Jerusalem, he decided to make a move against the Fatimids, who were attempting to capture Jaffa. The Latins rescued the city and pushed further into Jordan, even establishing some crucial outposts, such as Montreal. The following year, he returned to the region and marched as far as Aqaba on the Red Sea. After the local inhabitants fled, Baldwin constructed castles in the town and on a nearby island, leaving a garrison in both fortresses. The three strongholds, Montreal, Eilat and Pharaoh's Island, secured the control of the rich caravan routes between Syria and Egypt. They also enabled Baldwin to survey the movements of the Egyptian troops continuously. From the Red Sea coast, Baldwin hastened to Tyre and began the construction of a new fortress at the ladder of Tyre known as Scandalian Castle, which completed the blockade of the town from the mainland. Tyre was a major stronghold that continued to resist the Crusaders and was a vital front they had to close. But late in 1116, Baldwin fell seriously ill. On his deathbed, he ordered all of his debts to be paid off and began distributing his wealth and considered his successor. But this was not the end of Baldwin. The man who travelled all this way still had one good fight left in him, as did the other main protagonist of this story. In 1116, Alexios Komnenos got tired of waiting for someone else to finish the job and rode out in force. The Byzantine emperor, who had saved eastern Rome from annihilation, mustered an army aimed at reconquering Anatolia by striking at the very heart of the Sultanate of Rum. But as his troops were still being drilled near Nicomedia, several nomadic groups began raiding western Anatolia. This didn't dissuade the emperor, so he marched along the known route from Nicaea to Antioch in Pisidia as he headed towards Iconium. Smaller fortresses and outposts were captured, and many captives were rescued. Then the army entered the plateau. Malik Shah had gathered his own army and awaited the Romans in an ambush.
No.
However, in a rare sight of character growth, the 59-year-old Alexios, once the stubbornly impulsive young man who rushed headfirst into danger, felt disaster looming and decided to turn back. As he withdrew...
Okay, we love seeing character development, and Alexios has gone through his own. Okay, I was gonna say, because the surprise attack has been the undoing of so many frickin' Byzantine armies from the Bulgars onward. So, yeah. Yeah, so I'm happy to see that Alexios managed to pull off just fine. Though I'm kind of a bit worried for him. Like I said, like, the dude's kind of a bit on the older side. I mean, 59 is still, I think, pretty young. But again, this is he seems to be getting struck by a lot. So I'm just kind of worried about his health for this, you know?
Gathered numerous local Romans and escorted them back east. Aware that danger could loom around every turn, the emperor commanded that his soldiers make a hollow square formation. The soldiers made firm rectangles with civilians at the center, slowly moving through the dangerous landscape. Indeed, the now returning raiders from the west stumbled upon the large host and began attacking them with their usual hit-and-run tactics. At the rear, Malik Shah also pounced with his men. Day and night, the discipline and morale of the Byzantine soldiers were tested, but they did not falter under the Komneni standard. After realizing he could not break the formation, Malik Shah sent envoys and called for a truce. Sultan and Emperor met in person and shook hands as they ratified the treaty made under Malik Shah's father. The Sultanate of Rum kept control of central and eastern Anatolia, while the wealthy Byzantine western Anatolia would be free from raids. This was the best that Alexios could hope for, and while not...
Despite the fact that Trapezoid had been mostly autonomous for at least several decades, but Again, I guess Alexios, some of his grander ambitions of taking the whole, you know, of taking Anatolia and whatnot, it's a bit tragic that it never came into fruition. His grander plans, but I think that shouldn't take away from what he did do. He basically saved the Byzantine Empire from destruction, helped restore much greater stability to his empire. This still did took off a lot of land and defeated threats both eastward and westward, helped organize the First Crusade. He might just be one of the most important Byzantine emperors in history, and in my opinion, one of the best, easily top 3 in my opinion. Um, with Byzantine era Rome and whatnot. So again, a great man, a great emperor who was just a jack of all trades. And yeah, I really love the man personally. He's kind of been my favorite person the entire series, and the one that I can't help but always root for.
All of Anatolia was in his hands, every major city in the region was under his rule. But yet again, fate had different plans. As Malik Shah returned to his camp, his officers captured and blinded him as punishment for complacency. The source of their wealth was raiding, and this treaty could harm their way of life and their power. Alexios had saved the lives of thousands of his citizens, but yet again, he worked so hard to obtain so little. Only 2 years later, after 37 years on the throne, Alexios Komnenos finally succumbed to his illnesses. Few rulers have a resume as rich as his.
And beyond impressive. GG Alexios, rest in peace, dude. The man was great. I love Alexios. And I'm reading the Alexiad. And I'm just, like I said, this man was great.
His deeds are still being discussed today, with some historians laying the fault for the impending crusades and rivalry with merchant states flatly on his feet. To them, he is the man who opened Pandora's box while trying to save his empire. Others see him as the greatest Byzantine emperor, surpassing the likes of Justinian and Basil II, for his reforms of the clergy and monetary system, as well as the successful defense against the Normans, Pechenegs and Seljuks, and the reconquest of western Anatolia, despite a dozen assassination attempts and starting with nothing. But both sides agree that few rulers have ever been as devoted to their state and people as Alexios.
Agreed.
But our story, which took 2 years to make and correctly adjust the end date of the First Crusade, concludes with a different bittersweet ending, that of the last of the original princes who answered Urban's call. Baldwin of Jerusalem miraculously recovered in early 1117 and continued doing his best. He aimed to secure the southern frontier with a fresh new expedition against the Fatimids, which began in March 1118 and went as far as Farama on the Nile Delta without a fight, as Muslim civilians fled before the Crusader army. Baldwin's retainers were hopeful and urged him to attack Cairo itself, but suddenly, an old wound to his kidneys, received in 1103, reopened. The King of Jerusalem succumbed in a matter of days spent securing the succession, for which he named his brother Ustas III, but also allowed the barons to elect Baldwin of Bork if necessary. 5 days later, his body was buried in the cavalry chapel of the Holy Sepulchre.
Again, Baldwin's been another interesting character of this entire thing. Like, in the First Crusade, he kind of went and just founded Edessa and kind of just chilled there while most of the other crusade just went to Jerusalem and Antioch and all these other places. And then, like, fortune seemed to favor him, because then he got to just inherit Jerusalem. And, at first I was like, man, he's kind of underhanded, like with the way he founded Edessa, between, playing a part in, as the adoptive son and then letting the guy who adopted him kind of die without warning him. And then, the way he kind of would just randomly take territory, like, again, like, kind of not a nice man, kind of a jerk in that sense, and played on easy mode while he chilled in Edessa while everyone else went to Jerusalem. But then, like, the moment he took Jerusalem, he proved his worth, I think, from then on as a great fighter. And he managed to defeat the Fatimids. Played the game of politics with the other states, united and fought. Like, he proved his worth, you know, as a king. And it's hard not to say that he was beyond effective and even good at what he did. So again, a very interesting man. I think with a very interesting story arc. And he's the last one who stood standing, so again, just GG Baldwin, man. He knew how to play the game.
Next to that of his other brother, Godfrey, on Palm Sunday. 1118 saw the death of the Byzantine Emperor, King of Jerusalem, Abbasid Caliph, Seljuk Sultan, and the Bishop of Rome, acting as a hard reset that shuffled many political alliances and interests.
So much death at once.
The stories of the Seljuks, Romans, Latins, and Fatimids were far from their finale, but the story of the First Crusade and the main characters who caused this geopolitical shift had reached its conclusion. So ends our retelling of the First Crusade. We're currently working on videos on the Second Crusade, and you can watch.
So that's it, huh? I have to say, my friends, this was a great series. I loved this. I love Kings and Generals. He is my favorite historical YouTuber. And this was just a wonderful series. I loved every minute of it. I loved just such a great cast of characters. So much happened. It really is like the ultimate this is like real life Dungeons and Dragons. This felt like a real life D&D game. You know, with all the intrigue, with all the ups and downs, with every character being so like unique. Like, you know, every person just a big personality. Unique, ups and downs, kind of unintentionally the funniest thing ever, while also somewhat being tragic and disgusting. Like, this kind of has everything. Like, the First Crusade has everything, man. Again, this was a great series, and once again, Kings and Generals, you have outdone yourself. I love your content. I'm such a huge fan, and yeah, tomorrow we're gonna continue, because we're gonna be with Kings and Generals for a while, my friends. So, stay tuned. Tomorrow we begin something new from Kings and Generals. And I'll see you guys. Wait, I want to leave this with a question. Who of the original First Crusaders is your favorite? We'll leave Alexios out, because, you know, obviously he's the most logical choice. Let's leave Alexios out. Who would you say? Was it Baldwin? Was it Godfrey? Was it Raymond? Was it Tancred? Was it, Bohemond? Who of the OG Crusaders do you like the most, and why? Let me know down below, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye, everyone.